here to talk about two different issues of concern for the people of Sioux Falls in South Dakota, and that is the question of transparency and um, full disclosure about the widespread sexual abuse within the Sioux Falls Diocese, and also to talk about the statute of limitations and how that does not give justice to survivors, um, does not hold predators accountable, and does not make the community safer. Um, my personal story is that when I was 12 years old, I was raped and abused by my parish priest. He sexually abused me and raped me, which was very violent. He put a pillow over my head until, um, to the point that I thought that I was dying, but thankfully I woke up. I don't think the priest cared whether I lived or died at that moment. I did not have memories of some of that abuse for 30 years. I did not have memories for 50 years. Um, so the question of statute of limitations, of holding predators accountable, the average age of a victim of sexual abuse is 52. So when you have a statute of limitations such as you have here in South Dakota, um, doesn't provide justice for the survivor, doesn't hold the predator accountable, doesn't make the community safer. My experience of memories not coming forward is not unusual and is common within survivors of sexual abuse. We call ourselves survivors because we survive suicide and drugs and alcohol. And so it sometimes takes decades to for our memories to come forward. So the question is the opposition to allowing victims to come forward should be changed, that there should be justice for survivors. So we call on the people of South Dakota, the legislators, to enact dramatic reforms to allow a safer community. Uh, the other issue is that another reason why there needs to be reform of statute of limitations is because of the cover-up within the Catholic Church. We saw that recently the Diocese of Sioux Falls released the names of 9, whereas publicly we know of 22 others that the church has not released. And we feel that this is a way to mislead the community, and by this continual cover-up endangers the children of Sioux Falls. Just a minute ago we saw busloads of children unload just a couple feet away. These children are threatened as long as the church continues its practice of cover-up. I have distributed to the news the 4 additional names, as well as the 22 that are publicly known, so that all these names need to be publicly released. Lastly, I just want a minute about the statute of limitations. Is that it's so important for the safety of the community. A predator will continue to prey for decades and possibly abuse up to 100 children. And if they're not held accountable, they're going to continue to harm those people that are vulnerable. I think that's a start. And Andrew is going to say a minute.
First of all, my name is Andrew Wolf, and the first thing I want you to know about me is that I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse at the hands of Father James Kelly while at Boys Town in the early 80s. The second thing I want you to know about me is that I'm 51 years old, and for the past 37 years I've lived in shame, guilt, and horror that anyone would find out what happened to me. When I left Boys Town in 1983, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't tell anyone, not one person, and for the next 35 years I kept that promise. I lived a life of isolation, dysfunction, and tremendous shame because of that promise. I knew and have read about other children not only being sexually but physically and mentally abused. but for some reason I truly felt alone and as if I was the only one. That is until I reached out to SNAP, Survivors Networks of Those Abused by Priests, recently. One of the first things I was told that in a study by Child USA, a think tank based at the University of Pennsylvania, the average age of disclosure by a victim of sexual abuse is 52 years old. I'm here today to tell other victims it's okay. It's not your fault. It's okay to reach out for help. You won't be judged, and it gets better once you do. Finally, I'm here to ask for a change in the statute of limitations. If a child is abused and then the average age of disclosure is 52, that only creates more victims for those abusers, and it limits the help that victims desperately need. Thank you.
Louise?
Hi, my name is Louise Charbonneau Ahmet. I am a survivor. I went to school at Marty, South Dakota. I was molested and abused by Benny Lee and Father Francis Stuttmiller. The abuse, the sexual abuse never leaves you. Once you have recovery, it's there day and night. You don't not think about it. So it takes your childhood, it takes you have those middle years where you don't remember anything. My child once asked me, "Mother, what did you do when you were 9 and 10 years old?" And I thought a minute and I said, "I don't know." And I thought another minute and he said, "You don't know?" I said, "I don't know, Darren. I don't know." But when I had recovery, I knew why I didn't remember. And now it has taken my adult life. My adult life as a mother, as a wife, and as a grandmother. So you never, ever get rid of that sense of guilt, that sense of shame, that sense of, why did this happen to me? Why was it me and not somebody else? But you see, there were so many somebody else's who couldn't come forward, who never remembered, who still don't remember because of the stigmatism of remembering and then having someone tell you that the predator has a free ride in South Dakota. That's what they have, a free ride.
Were you at a boarding school?
I was at a boarding school
In Marty?
in Marty, South Dakota.
And the
St. Paul
your
Syndrome.
people you say abused you, are they on the list?
No,
Father Francis.
Father Francis is. I don't. Benny Lee isn't. And but he was a lay worker. He was in a sense everything. He was everything. He was the man
Janitor.
that was everywhere. He had keys to every building. He had keys to every. And he was everywhere. He was in our playroom. He was in our dorm. He had keys to everything. We were locked up. We were locked up like Auschwitz was locked up. There were gates on every window. There were gates between every floor. The sexual abuse comes after a very long conditioning. A very long conditioning. I had sisters there that I didn't know were there. We're separated. We were separated. We were segregated. So who are you going to tell? There was so much shame. There was so much shame. There was shame about being a woman. There was shame about everything. Our life was a shame. Our life was sadness. When I go back to Marty and I walk through the buildings, I can hear him. I can hear him cry. I can't go in the church at all. I can't make myself go in that place of such horrid abuse.
What do you want now?
I want no more hiding the pedophile. I want the pedophile to pay for what he's done. I want him not to be able to go to prison or go to jail and eat like we do and sleep like we do and get out in 3 months to do it again. Do they think they're not going to do it again? Do they think they're not going to do it again? They're going to do it again. That's what I want. I want no more hiding. I want justice, and I want no more hiding the pedophile. Just like every priest that was moved from our campus to another campus to another campus, to do it again and again and again. How many survivors do you actually think there are? Just us? No. There are so many there. It's unfathomable how many other children. We were children. First, second, third, and fourth grade. Children, little children, who then were conditioned to never speak of it because our mothers would be killed, our fathers would die, we would die and go to hell. To hell. Where is this awful place that I don't want to go? That's what I want. I want justice for the survivors. I want justice for the survivors, and I want pedophiles to never be hidden again.
Good morning, afternoon. My name is Barbara Charbonneau Dolan, and I'm one of the 9 sisters who is a survivor of the Marty, South Dakota St. Paul's Indian Mission. And I was abused by both nuns and priests. And when we talk about conditioning, it started in the very first week of school. They don't want to talk because statute of limitations, they say, on mental and physical abuse is passed, but it hasn't for us. Because the conditioning started the first week. We had to be deloused because we were all dirty. So they would put DDT powder all over our body. We had to wear that for a week. And then on Friday, they would show us the film of a German sergeant at a concentration camp. And at the end of that movie, all you seen was the shoes, and they were let into the showers. So what does that tell you? They were killed. They were gassed to death. So on Saturday, we got to shower. So when you're 5 years old, what do you think we thought? We were going to be gassed to death. So the conditioning started that early for us. And with each and every abuse, the structure was, you are not to speak of this. You are not to. So we had that in us, conditioned.
Who were you abused by?
I was abused by Father Francis Suttmiller. He used to laugh when he told us about his name, Suttmiller. He came over from Germany, and he said because when they came to the States, they needed to sound more like they were Caucasian, so they dropped the Soot, and he was just Father Francis Miller. But if you look up his thesis, it's Suttmiller. So you know that he was lying. I was abused by him, Sister Agnes, Sister Aletta Marie. We could give you a list of many others. My dissertation was on historical trauma, the boarding school era, and all of the victims and survivors that I interview were abused by priests, and they were all students who went to St. Paul's Indian Mission.
What is your understanding of why those names are not on the list that have been released?
I would say because in all of the states and all of the cases that have come forward, Caucasian women have come forward and men. And I believe it's racially biased. There's no doubt that all of the survivors from Marty are Native American. We're the last, if you look statistically at anything, we're the other. So it's like we don't matter, go away. But we're not going to go away. They have said horrible things. Mr. Smith, the lawyer for the church, has said horrible things. What, Indians living in squalor, looking for a brass ring? I don't live in squalor. I work for the University of Minnesota. I'm a professor, so I've become an advocate and a voice for change. And we're not going to go away. We're going to continue this fight because it's that important that South Dakota recognized what they did. We were 6 days from trial when Mr. Smith ran a bill through that stopped us. And then Governor Rounds signed it into law, even though we called and called and called. We had people from SNAP call. We had many calls into his office, veto this bill. Then later he said he didn't know it would affect anybody. Well, I'm sorry, it must be okay for the politicians to lie. We've had so many people on our committees when we went and introduced various amendments who have lied.
So what do you want done now?
I want accountability, responsibility on the part of the church, and when you suffer historical trauma, it never leaves you. We've never had any type of compensation to seek the counseling we would need. You can't just go to a counselor and tell them this if they don't have a specialized training in a victimology. They just don't have it. So we had our vetting process. We had Dr. Jeff King came in and vetted I and my 9 sisters. He's an expert in the area. We all suffer from PTSD. We all have problems with interpersonal relationships. Some of us sisters had problems with alcoholism and overcame. All of us have had many, many mental health issues. I suffer from chronic depression. But somehow I find the courage to get up, to speak, to go to conferences, write articles, be published, because they won't silence us. We will continue this fight. We will continue saying what you did to us was wrong and you need to be accountable and responsible. Even if you look at the big conference that they just had at the Vatican, did they do anything? They rehashed what they had before, which was really another way to cover up in a different way. So they didn't really do anything. Each time this happens, we're re-victimized. We hold that, we're re-victimized. We're trauma again, you come. I mean, what child at 5 years old is forced, like I was, to perform oral sex on Father Francis and would take me in the basement of the church, which was supposed to be a sacred place? Well, it wasn't. It was the most scary building on campus because many students were abused or raped in that church, and he'd lift me up, he'd put me in a coffin and say, if you say anything, I'll keep you in here. So I was forced to perform those despicable acts in order to survive. But I did, and I live to tell it. And nobody's going to silence me. Nobody's going to silence our voices.
Now the diocese says that they don't have to release the names of people who served under different orders who just came through South Dakota at various times.
Oh, well, we can release them. We're not silenced. We know who they are.
And we have a list that's published on Bishop Accountability of those priests that the church continues to hide. The whole thing that they have to continue to cover up. What they want to do is they want to hide from the parishioners how widespread it is, that they're not honest enough to release the names of those that are nuns, brothers, deacons, and religious orders. And it's another form of cover-up. That's all it is.
The diocese would argue that these people weren't under their control.
That is, I'm trying not to swear, that is wrong. Every priest, every clergy member kisses the ring of the bishop. They have to have permission of the bishop to serve in the diocese. So to say that it's merely a mechanism to hide, it's not on the basis of responsibility. They have the ability to kick out any clergy person, whether they're a religious order or a nun or a brother or a deacon.
Rapid City took a different tactic and released the names of people in different orders.
Right. And sometimes some of the dioceses don't release names of those that have abused adults. And as we mentioned, in this case, not listing nuns or not listing brothers or deacons or religious orders. But the question is, for the safety of the community, there has to be full accountability. There has to be zero tolerance for sexual abuse.
What should South Dakota do? How should they change their state law to make it more?
There should be an ability for survivors to get justice. There should be no statute of limitations either for criminal or civil. There should be an ability for all survivors to step forward. The second thing that this does by eliminating these statute of limitations is it provides an opportunity to hold those predators accountable, because they'll rape and abuse for decades unless they're stopped. And the third thing is it provides safety for the community. The children that we hear next door are threatened as long as there's cover-ups, as long as there's no accountability for these predators who have raped and abused for decades. And for the church to cover up. The only reason the church is releasing these names is we were compelled to by the Pennsylvania grand jury and the Illinois investigation. It wasn't because of any moral authority of the church that they think this is a good thing, because they should have done it a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. They didn't, they haven't. And it's only when they're compelled by an outside force. It's just like their charter, their Child for the Protection of Children in 2003. That was prompted by the investigation in Boston. Again, it wasn't because of any internal moral compass. And it takes us to stand here to name the names. And we have the list right here that we could share. The names are there publicly, just the diocese is not honest with its community. It's not honest with its parishioners.
Right. And I really believe at some point we not only the abusers are responsible, but at what point does the church become responsible? Because in 1983, when I left Boys Town, 3 months later, Father Kelly was removed from Boys Town under allegations of sexual abuse. He was moved to another place, abused there, moved to another place. He was moved to 5 to 6 locations, and the abuse just followed. You're not doing anything for the victims. All you're doing is creating more victims. Right. That's all you're doing. You're not accepting responsibility. There's nothing happening. They're just leaving a path of destruction. At what point, not only is that abuser responsible, but the church becomes responsible?
In my case, the abuser, the priest that raped and abused me when I was 12 years old, was caught in 3 different parishes in Iowa. I was raped and abused in Sioux City, but he was at Whitmore, Danbury, and Fort Dodge. And he got caught in each one. They moved him to my parish. The church knew, the authorities knew, move him there, raped and abused me. When I came forward in 2016, 10 of my classmates came forward saying that they were abused by this same priest. So the church knows, and they continue to this day. The Sioux Falls Diocese only releases 9 names. We have documentation of 31.
With the Native boarding schools, with the Native American boarding schools, it didn't matter if they moved or not. I know Father Francis came from St. Francis School, but it wouldn't have mattered because nobody, who were we to report to? You're there 9 years, your whole 9 months. You're conditioned already, so you never talk about it. And in one of the sessions we had, Mr. Smith actually told my oldest sister, Joanne, it was her fault that we got abused because she didn't tell. And then he said, then your next sister, Mary Lou, it was her fault, and so on down the line. So it ended up to be, it was our own fault for not speaking about it. And we were all children. It was our own fault, is what he said. And, he's the lawyer for the church. He's despicable. The things he has said to us, the innuendos of how he wrote that amendment that he's so proud of.
That was signed late at night. Another thing is Sioux Falls Diocese claims no jurisdiction over Marty. And I've always understood as a Catholic, or a has-been Catholic, that every church has a diocese, and
Yes.
so what diocese was Marty under then? I've talked to a lady who still goes to church there, and I said, why are you giving money to some place that was so hurtful to all of us? And she didn't know. And I said, where does that money go? And she said, well, at Sioux Falls, I think. And I said, you would send money to someone who has hurt us so bad. I then found out she didn't go there anymore. It's all of those things. Why do we want to justify? One of the senators last year made a big production about the church being crumbled down, was one of our sisters' wish, that the church crumble to the ground. He made such a big production out of that. Are you for real? That is a building. It will not save you. It will not do a thing for you. You have to have the Lord here. You have to be able to say, He is my God who gives me this world, this place to honor in His name. Not a building where you go in and someone's on an altar preaching to you about what you should and should not say. We went to confession every day in Marty. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. What do you confess after a while? We make them up.
Make 'em up. We
Right.
made 'em
We'll
up.
just trade.
Got
We
together.
used
Let's
to say,
trade.
let's trade sins.
That's our sins.
And I confessed that I was a bad girl to my mother. She wasn't even there. So that's what you become. That's what you become, someone's victim.